Welcome to another episode of the WAN Manager podcast. I am your host, Bryan, and this is the show where we talk to networking experts about the data services that make business possible. So folks who listen to the show will know that the MEF has come up pretty often, especially in our episode a couple weeks ago with Mark Cohn from Spirent. And to talk a lot more about what MEF is working on in the enterprise network space, I'm very pleased to welcome today Pascal Menezes, who is the CTO of MEF, to kind of take us through all that work. Welcome, Pascal.
Greg, such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's great to talk to you again. I thought maybe just for the audience, we usually like to start out with just a brief review of your background. And then after that, the elevator pitch of what the MEF is for anybody out there who might be unfamiliar. Probably most folks listening are, but you always want to capture all that, right? Yeah, so how did you come to be the CTO at MEF, Pascal?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. But a little bit about my background. So, I've been in networking, I think, almost close to 40 years. It's been a long journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember starting as a developer and then, working on the kind of the minis and mainframes. And
Yeah.
then I got into X25 and Bicing. I was like, how cool is this thing, networking? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really dating myself. But then internet networking came along, and I was like, "Oh, this is incredible!" And then all of a sudden, IP started flowing out of every part of every socket in the wall and everywhere in the world, right? And so I was on that internet networking journey from in the '90s and late '80s to '90s, and so that was been huge. And then I've seen every transformation you can imagine networking into obviously ATM, frame relay, MPLS, and then I was at Microsoft, and I did many startups. And then I was at Microsoft for a decade, and that was really interesting because I got to see what it means to really execute at scale,
Right.
and it was
Right.
phenomenal journey and experience. And I was leaving Microsoft, and basically, at that point, Dan Pitt from ONF said, "Hey, come work with me on this cloud stuff because this cloud's intriguing." This is like over
Mm-hmm.
6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know it's everywhere.
Right. Right.
And then basically, from there, Dan left ONF, and then Nan approached me, said, "Hey, we really need help on transforming from carrier Ethernet up into something that network transformation because it's a very
Mm-hmm.
interesting area." And obviously,
And for listeners, if I could break in, sorry, but that would be Nan Chen, who's the founder of MAF, right? So yeah, just
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Nan Chen, the founder of
Mm-hmm.
that. So Nan talked to me, and network transformation is huge now, and everybody's you know, top of mind. And if you think about it, SDN and a V orchestration is now the norm in any network transformational journey. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and finally, from the early '90s, internet networking was such a huge part for a decade, and then all of a sudden, it just kind of became almost like not that interesting. But
Right.
now, since SDN has come along and NAV and network transformation, it's been an incredible journey, and it's like back in the '90s, and I just love it. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that's what's good about this industry in general, right? Is that unless you really want to, it's hard to get stuck in a rut. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There's so much fun to be had if you really just apply yourself and if you're truly passionate about the things you do. Absolutely.
Yeah. So then also, if you could maybe just give us, like I said, the sort of elevator pitch of what MEF is doing for anyone listening that might not be super familiar with your work there.
Yeah. So MEF or MEF started out with
I
basically
never know which one. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was really originally Metro Ethernet form. We don't go by that
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
And the reason that showed up was that, and by the way, in 2001, I co-founded the MEF with Nan and I think 10 or
Hmm.
11. I can't remember how many other companies. I left 6 months later, so I had nothing to do with the success of
Yeah,
MEF.
gotcha.
But basically, MEF, and that's our official name is MEF
Hmm.
Forum. MEF started with the idea that how can we transform, the wide area network with very high speed pipes of Ethernet. And
Hmm.
if you remember back in 2001, Ethernet was in the LAN side only, and you never
Right.
thought about Ethernet in the wide area front at all. It was
Right.
all SONET, SDH, and ATM and things like that. But it definitely was not Ethernet. Ethernet was kind of blasphemy, and that was like
Right.
craziness. And then MEF took it upon himself to transform that wide area front with carry Ethernet. Start with Metro Ethernet and went carry Ethernet. And that really drove MEF into a massive success.
Right.
over the last 15 years after that. And basically carrier Ethernet started spewing up everywhere, and it became the transport norm to have carrier Ethernet
Hmm.
globally between all the providers connected at the data plane level. So basically, at the end of the day, it's an $80+ billion market, including services and products, that continues to grow massively. And you
Right.
see Ethernet as the big pipe that connects all the providers together worldwide at the data plane level. And we'll
Right.
talk about automation later, but that's
Hmm.
kind of where MEF has spent 15 plus years starting 2001, was just interconnecting the world at that massive 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit, 100 gigabit, 400 gigabit kind of pipes, which is needed for digital transformation now for sure.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that all the carriers that are members of MEF, right, are all turning down their old TDM and Sonnet SDH links at this point, anyway, right? So it has become the currency of the realm, other than wavelengths in terms of backbone transport and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, so true, Greg. And one thing I did forget, we have 200 plus members, 130 of them service providers. So it says a
Hmm.
lot that the service providers really saw value in the early days of how we have to connect this network together. Of course, we have the internet that's kind of a grab ball free for all, but obviously managed networks of a high speed transport between all providers is very very critical,
Right.
especially now with this
Right.
digital economy. Well, I'm sure we'll cover that. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. This is the WAN Manager podcast. Sort of our audience, whatever side of that market they sit on, are interested in enterprise, corporate, multinational kind of networks. And so that that's the direction you guys have been going. When I was writing up these questions for you, Pascal, I remember sitting down with you in San Jose. I had to look it up, but it was the summer of 2017. So and you went through all of the sort of the ideas that you had about MEF working on SD-WAN standards, orchestration for enterprise networks, and the new ventures in that stage where you're moving beyond the carrier Ethernet part. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you was kind of at that time, put ourselves in 2017, there were dozens of SD-WAN vendors popping up. There was definitely, I can tell you, because I was running conferences for end users that were just hearing about the word SD-WAN, there was a lot of confusion on their side about what even was SD-WAN, or I like Mark Cohn's way of putting this, SD-WAN washing, right? So I wonder if you could just kind of take us back to that time when you were explaining all that stuff to me then, and the history of how MEF sought to bring order to that chaos, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So look, I remember at Microsoft, when I was still at Microsoft, the idea of how hyperscale data centers were built out was using these kind of underlay switches, layer three switches, and then
Mm-hmm.
having overlays on top of them with NVGRE and VXLAN. And that was
Right.
a very intriguing concept because it
Yeah.
decoupled the two together and allowed very agile overlays with a very high speed transport underneath. And that's in hyperscale data centers. And I remember in 2010, I would say, thinking about how, wow, wouldn't this be cool on the wider front? And then all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
2012, we start seeing the proliferation of these startups. So this idea of overlays and underlays at the wider front.
Right.
So when I had left Microsoft, and that was about 2015, 2016, I took on the role of CTO of MEF. I told Nanchan and the board at that time that, we got to move up the stack. The
Mm-hmm.
transports are
Right.
going to go through this transformation where they'll still be very, very important. You need to have high speed pipes, and
Yeah.
they are relying on fiber and wavelengths also, and Ethernet's a framing format, and then IP above that. But when you get beyond that, it's going to get much, much more software defined, more virtualized, and you want to be moving up the stacks from strategy level. And I remember, this is now 2016, that there was this SD-WAN kind of free for all going on, and SD-WAN was the latest
Mm-hmm.
buzz, and everybody was talking about it, and it was amazing, and it was like, wow, look at this transform. It just got legs and just going in all directions, and there
Right.
was a lot of chaos. And it's exactly what we saw in Carrier Ethernet. Carrier Ethernet was
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same where in the early days in 2001, when the idea of can Ethernet go in the wide area front, there was a lot of people, deciding and doing all kinds of things, but it was a lot of market confusion.
Right.
And that market confusion slows down anything because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's no one understands. Like an SDN had the exact same issue. No one understands what the vocabulary was, the constructs, the labels, the language. it was like, well, let me try to explain this. There's these things that go on top and under, and so when you go to buy this stuff, it's really hard to understand. Imagine, like, I talk the
Right.
analogy of buying TVs, or you go buy a TV and I want this high definition. I need to plug my stereo and to my my Wi-Fi. But how do you do that? Well, if you don't have HDMI and 4K and all these standardized formats, and then the guy brings home the TV, and then all of a sudden he can't plug in anything, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hey, take this back. So it's
Yeah.
exactly what happened to Ethernet. Ethernet got
Hmm.
transformed. SD-WAN's was exactly in that state. Very
Right.
chaotic. Everybody had their own differentiation, their own secret sauce, their own language and vocabulary. So it's like trying out English and French and German all one
Right.
together, and it just doesn't work. And that's kind of what we tried to do, is remove that confusion with our standardization.
Well, yeah, and that's a great point. And that from then the enterprise standpoint, you can't jump into a new technology when just like with carrier Ethernet, that there is no network provider, there is no overlay provider to which you can go and get absolutely everything you need everywhere, right? So if they can't speak to each other, to put your network together, then it's a pretty much a non-starter, right? So.
Yeah, and it's exactly why when I saw this, I thought, well, who's going to grab this space? It's going to be very critical. I believe SD-WAN is going to transform wide area network as we know in the next decade, and it's already,
Hmm.
you're seeing
Hmm.
that everywhere, and every
Yeah,
enterprise has
no
got
doubt.
some SD-WAN. Either they're on the journey, deployed the journey, or kicking the cans at that journey. But
Right.
everyone's thinking about SD-WAN from any medium enterprise business or up. And really what we did at that point was I put a stake in the sand, saying we need to, if no one's going to own the standardization, we should own it. And we did
Right.
that. It's exactly what
Hmm.
we did. We started and we got a few members in the SD-WAN community, vendors, to drive and standardize, what is the definition, vocabulary, language, all the things I talked about that removes this marked confusion.
Right.
And we did exactly that. And it took us 2 years to get to the first version of that. And then we
Hmm.
delivered professional certification to train people what is SD-WAN, given that vocabulary, language, and terminology on our first specification of SD-WAN. We call that MEF 70. And
Hmm.
then we also did service and vendor certifications and so on. And that really helped tremendously in the SD-WAN market. We have a lot of
Right.
members, certified vendors and service providers and professionals. So that was
Hmm.
huge for us. And that took us to the journey, to the point where at 2019, MEF 2019, we released the first version of SD-WAN in the market of a
Right.
standardization,
Right.
right? So, and then today we now have, just last week at the board meeting, we just had the final blessing that we're going to, meaning letter ballot, which means it's the final, 2 months before it becomes an official standard, where we go out to our members for intellectual property to say, you
Hmm.
know, vote on this now. And at that point, letter ballot, it's already like socialized massively.
Right.
And
Right.
we're just about to release version 2 is the takeaway.
Hmm.
Version 2 is going to
Ah,
come
yeah.
out in the next couple of months, and this is going to be
Right.
huge. Version 2 of this is massive because it includes many, many things that were left out in version 1, including performance objectives, more awareness of the underlay, this idea of zones, so you can partition things like the VLAN idea,
Right.
topologies. So you have spoken hub and spoke topologies or full mesh topologies. So there's many things in this
Hmm.
SD-WAN version 270.1 that's very powerful, that handles this kind of idea of a SD-WAN version 2 or SD-WAN 2.0. So
Right. Right. Well, actually, you know what? I might want to take a step back from that, and just once you're done, then a couple of years ago with MEF 70, what is your sort of standard definition of what is an SD-WAN? The sort of what are the sine qua non features of an SD-WAN, if you will?
yeah, so interesting enough, after you get through all the framework of vocabulary and labels, constructs, what SD-WAN really gives is value to the enterprise is it decouples the underlay. So whenever you buy an underlay, small branches might have internet, or larger branches might have a internet and an MPLS pipe,
Hmm.
or various variations of underlays, and
Right.
has an overlay that really at the end of the day meets an application objective, and that's the most
Right.
important thing. In
Hmm.
the past, we had these classless services and all these things that you didn't know how the applications mapped to that, and so the enterprise had to figure out how to map that through
Right.
some classification engine, at the
Hmm.
ingress to the source provider network. And so whether you did that to diff code points, or you had to go configure that as ACL policies in your routers and so on, access control policies. The bottom line doesn't matter. The point is that someone had to do that. What SD-WAN did was, hey, you just specify your application type. You don't have to specify the 5 tuple flows or that's just the name. And then SD-WAN, and tell us the performance objective you want. And you can even just do it as mission critical or time sensitive or something. And then basically you put that policy in the cloud, and all of a sudden that gets distributed to the sites you want. And then the SD-WAN environment tries to meet that objective with its overlays. So if it's got multiple links, it tries to traffic steer and tries to figure out exactly how that performance of the application is behaving. And that is the essence of why SD-WAN became extremely powerful, was that application awareness, centralized policy, and the ability to use underlays of any types, and including backups or offload. Offloading became a real thing. Offload right to the internet directly, non-mission critical stuff. And mission critical, run it on more managed networks of carry Ethernet, MPLS, and so on.
Or even beyond the non-mission critical stuff, it's that there was, at the same time as the SD-WAN revolution, that cloud revolution that you sort of touched on earlier, which is that all of these SaaS services, UCaaS or whatever, were born on the internet as internet best efforts kind of tools in the first place. So it started to make less and less sense to send your sort of SaaS traffic over an MPLS link breaking out centrally anyway, right? So sort of facilitates that as well, right?
Yeah, but then what you've now seen is everybody's directly connected to the cloud, and meaning every service provider has a direct connection to the cloud with ExpressRoute or Direct Connect from Amazon. And these became a huge thing. Now all of a sudden, if it's non-mission critical, we'll use the internet. Mission critical, no, I want to run a very high-speed pipe or a dedicated a managed connection to that cloud, and that became the norm now. 2015, that wasn't the norm, and it's become the norm that every service provider is cloud connected to every kind of hyperscaler and SaaS providers you can imagine, with a direct connection of some sort, not using the internet. And now all of a sudden, how do you traffic steer that workloads over that very good connection on the underlay, and you still have the traffic management of the overlay of SD-WAN to make sure that application is performing? And that at the essence is what I believe enterprise want, is that applications just get the performance guarantees no matter how that's done. They don't care. It's just done on the wide air front, and it's done by SD-WAN, and it's all outsourced to SD-WAN to make that happen. And when it's not happening, you want visibility. So visibility and control are critical. That's the key aspect. So.
Well, what every network manager wants is for the problem not to be the network. Exactly. But I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, it's been for many years that we've been hearing from the enterprises that what they really want is an application level SLA, not a network SLA, and that is whether it's attached to an SLA that someone has specific control over. The concept is there, right? Which is that's the whole idea behind SD-WAN, is that you're looking at the application performance, not looking specifically at the network performance. Yeah,
exactly. And in the past, what you had to do is you'd have to run, application performance management systems to see, is that network doing what it says it's going to do in that class of service, and then you have to go back to the service provider and prove them out that it was not working, and it was really this decoupling ships in the night model, and it was terrible. Now that's all munched together under an SD-WAN paradigm.
Yeah, that's the other real key that we hear from enterprises very often is the freedom to be able to not just select the underlay from whatever sort of might be the best cost or the most available or whatever, but also be able to select the providers of the underlay and work across a bunch of different providers seamlessly, rather than having to rely on one provider that has NNIs, and the NNIs are their problem, and it's many layers of abstraction and trouble tickets away from you, right? So.
Yeah, so true. So true.
Yeah. So you mentioned this earlier, but I just wanted to sort of circle back and see if you had anything to elaborate on that next stage. The SD-WAN 2.0 has emerged in the last couple of years. MEF is updating standards on that. Any deeper dives on what will come out in? Is it 70.1, or is there a new standard?
So look, we're going to release very shortly 70.1 version 2, but let's talk about what people are calling SD-WAN 2.0 or next generation SD-WAN. When SD-WAN first came out, this movement to the cloud was not all there yet. It was just kind of talked about. IT had not moved to the cloud. And it was really about SD-WAN was connecting the data centers and the branches, together with the new paradigm of WAN than the old one. And then all of a sudden, this IT to the cloud became huge, and hybrid multi-cloud is massive, and it's
Hmm.
kind of the norm now. We're seeing it, and so that was the next phase: is how do you get to all your clouds with SD-WAN? You're seeing all kinds of SD-WAN offerings from all the hyperscalers and SaaS providers being the norm. And you're seeing the idea now you extend to your data centers and private clouds, your public clouds, and so all of that's all connected with SD-WAN, which also means then you have to virtualize SD-WAN, and that to live in all these cloud hyperscalers, IaaS infrastructures, and so on. So virtualization is critical. The other thing that also we're also doing is the idea that SD-WAN is transforming wide areas. We know it for the next decade, so we have to have interoperability. Now, in
Mm,
70 and
right.
70.1, we defined service definitions. We
Hmm.
never defined this idea of interoperability between different vendors.
Right.
And so, what we undertook about a year ago with the edge coming in, and that's another great thing about SD-WAN 2.0, it lives at the edge.
Hmm.
Now, the edge computing environments have the ability to host SD-WAN, virtualized instances at the edge,
Right.
so you're only one loop away, an ISP, local loop away, one hop away, they call it, to the site, and you don't have to go transit connections and things like that.
Yeah, that's particularly convenient for what happened to the world in the intervening time, right? That the concept of being able to download, say, software onto your employee's laptop that is then an edge instance of your SD-WAN network from wherever they're sitting at home or wherever, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. Users working from anywhere, and then there was two scenarios at the home, your laptop, or even ship a small,
hmm.
little SD-WAN appliance, and they would just manage, over the Netflix from the house, manage your business
Right.
critical function workloads first. But the bottom line is that through all of this journey, the cloud integration, working from home, working from anywhere, became all important. But the other important thing we saw was that as SD-WAN becomes pervasive, you want to have the edge, and this is what we've now started this project about a year plus ago, with service providers saying, hey, and even hyperscalers and SaaS providers saying, hey, I'm going to putting SD-WAN for my edges. I can't support 20 vendors of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So how do I have this universal SD-WAN edge, at my edge that talks to all the various vendor types at the different customer sites?
Right.
And so we've started this project a year plus ago, and stay tuned. It'll come out probably end of this year, early next year. I think it'll be more early next year. This universal SD-WAN edge scenario, which
Hmm.
defines minimal interrupt at the control plane, data plane, telemetry plane, and management plane, so
Right.
that service providers can operate this universal SD-WAN edge, or even SaaS providers, service providers, since SD-WAN becomes ubiquitous. Then they can still work with anybody's SD-WAN at the enterprise edge, and so
Hmm.
whatever vendor they choose and they like and have been using can still operate. And that
Right.
became a critical use case for the edge use case with these service providers. So that
Yeah,
that's
that's.
another aspect of SD-WAN too. That was
Mhm.
interoperability.
Yeah, so not so much the driving force being interoperability from the enterprise perspective. Most enterprises, unlike the underlay, are going to source the overlay from a single provider, and it's an M&A that might sort of complicate that. But from the cloud service provider end, from the application end, they're able to push everything out to a bunch of different SD-WAN provider nodes at the edge from those central kind of locations. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, think about it. If what we found, and was kind of very intriguing to me, that I really thought that as managed SD-WAN would roll out, they would just say, "Hey, here's the SD-WAN vendor to use for your edge,"
Hmm.
and that's it.
Hmm.
What we found was the opposite. Service providers were really asked by the enterprise customer, "No, I want this vendor to be at my edge, my
Right.
enterprise edge." And so
Right.
now most service providers have to support two, three, four,
Yep.
five vendors at the
Hmm.
enterprise edge,
Right.
the CPE. So
Right.
now they're like, "Whoa, I can't support at 200 pops or 2,000 pops,
Right.
on
Yeah.
my edges to support, seven, six, eight, 10 vendor types, whatever the number is, at every
Hmm.
edge, times, 100, 200, 2,000 pops. It's the operational complexity is massive. Well, you,
Right.
you could say, oh, you can virtualize 10 and now try to operate 10, different instances. Very,
Right.
very complicated. Now. and OpEx.
Yeah, and they have to do that because as an MSP, whether you're a carrier or whatever, you don't want to lose an enterprise because they prefer this flavor versus that flavor, even if they like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I didn't expect that. It was kind of
Hmm.
very enlightening to see that that became the norm, and it is now the norm in any MSP offering of SD-WAN.
Right, right, absolutely. All right, so we're kind of maybe midpoint here. I thought we might shift gears to the next hot thing that's happening out there, right? Which is that with all of these changes that have happened to the underlay, especially the move away from a private kind of MPLS network, the whole security posture of the enterprise has changed. We talk about this on the show pretty often because it's become such a big deal now. But in early days, especially, one of the biggest issues was just that change itself of getting the network team and the security team to communicate better. Right? I think we're past that now, and we're getting to a place where they're really looking to implement something like zero trust or SASE. And I know MEF has plans to dive into sort of both of these areas, and that they're very interrelated. But I want to start there, picking up what we've been talking about of how do you see the security piece working in conjunction with the SD-WAN work that you've done?
Yeah, so great question, Greg. Look, it's really apparent now what enterprises want is a frictionless environment from wherever their users are to wherever the service is, which is mainly now in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And they want application performance guarantees, and that was SD-WAN, and it is
Right.
SD-WAN. And now they're like, I want security guarantees, cybersecurity guarantees. Like, I mean, obviously, guarantees is a hard thing to put in
Sure. Yeah.
your finger up. But look, they don't really want any malware.
Right.
So that's kind of hard, challenging. But let's just look at that. So they want that frictionless environment to have application performance guarantees and free of malware, right, from
Mm-hmm.
wherever they are to wherever they go. That is now become the norm. And as you see, cybercrime is 1.5 trillion and growing. It's massive, and
Mm-hmm.
we don't still know how to manage all the attacks that are happening at the enterprise level. It's still very complicated, as you saw in the
Yep.
pipeline attacks and solar wind and all the various ways these guys are coming in. These threat actors are incredible.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden it's all about cybersecurity. It's like, oh my God, how do I deal with cyber? It's massive and pain point. And, and when my workers or my users go to home or they work from the coffee shops, how do I secure them? They're not in the
Right.
corporate boundaries where we normally would put all these very extensive hardware security postures in. So
Mm-hmm.
this became a huge problem. And certainly during the pandemic, it certainly showed itself. So now all of a sudden, the craze has gone into SASE, and then SASE, you don't have SASE without zero trust, and now
Right.
zero trust is talked about everywhere. So now SASE and zero trust is everywhere, top of mind. And you don't really decouple now SD-WAN from SASE and zero trust. They're like three peas in a pod, and
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
really bottom line is they
Right.
are all kind of coming together, converging together as an offering.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we're always trying to sort of nail down, whether it's in our research at TeleGeography, whether it's in conjunction with the enterprises, even kind of trying to figure this out, or on the podcast too, is what do you see as the actual key products that are emerging, and so what I mean by that is if I go through we have lists of a couple dozen security providers that have a quote unquote SASE offering, and it strikes me that we might be in kind of the similar situation as we were with SD-WAN a few years ago, where this is the word that you need to have there now, right? But understanding what the actual products and services that make up SASE are is kind of dependent on who you're talking to. Is that the way that you're seeing it now?
Yeah. So look, what we did was just like when we talked together. I think you said 2017, right? So
Hmm.
MSD-WAN, we about a year plus ago, we took on realizing this movement that SD-WAN will be coupled with cybersecurity. We
Right.
took on the portfolio of cybersecurity in very specialized areas. So we now have very active work being done on standardizing SD-WAN. I mean, sorry,
Hmm.
SD-WAN, SASE,
Right.
very important. because there's been no really standardization in SASE, and zero trust because they go together.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
even though NIST had a zero trust great framework document, it wasn't a standard. It was more of a conceptual framework document that
Mm-hmm.
people get their heads around what is zero trust.
Exactly. That there's been this, the conceptual framework is pretty clear, but the part that I think a lot of enterprises are struggling with is attaching that conceptual framework to products that I can buy and exactly, where to implement them and how they get implemented.
Yeah, so let's just talk about this. So what we did was we have very much an active work that will come out probably again mid next year, I would say,
Hmm.
of SASE and zero trust. It might come out earlier, but like anything, it has to have a lot of reviews by members. But the bottom line is we have two specifications going on: zero trust and SASE. Let's just talk about those two because they all
Hmm.
fit together. Our SASE spec talks again. It removes confusion, just like we did with SD-WAN. What is the constructs, the framework label constructs, vocabulary, language that we can all get on the same page and call it the
Right.
same way.
Right.
So we have this thing called subject actors, target actors, enforce policy endpoints, which follows a lot of the
Hmm.
IETF policy enforcement points, PEPs, and so on, PDPs, and so on. And then there's the idea of identity management, and then what are the identities? Well, there's you know device, there's user, and there's application that needs to be
Hmm.
um, looked at as identity. And then where are they trying to go? We call them those so those subject actors, and then they go to target actors, and those could be also mainly application, but they could be other users and devices too.
Hmm.
So all of this has to have this idea of identity, and identity has to have access control. So what can that
Hmm.
identity, whether it be user or device application, do? And so in our zero trust specification, we describe all of this, including also time of day and contextual stuff, which
Hmm.
has to do with access control. So
Right.
you have authentication authorization, but what is the authorization? It has to have contextual stuff. Whereas
Right.
that
Does this
user,
meet the standards that we think it should based on location and time and that sort of thing? Hmm.
right, exactly. And then all of that has to flow back into policy framework, just like
Right.
SD-WAN is policy, which we define in our spec. This has to be a policy, right? So SASE, has the vocabulary of all of this, and we call it, subject actors, target actors, and they go through a security cloud, and that security cloud has a bunch of security functions. Now, the problem is there's so many security functions you can think of, and
Right.
you talk about IDS, IPS, or DLP, or there's many things,
Hmm.
CASB, and they're just, I think there's like, I don't know, it's like 15, 20
Yep.
functions. So what we did in another companion spec is start defining these functions in a way that we can define the behavior, not how to
Hmm.
implement it, so that people can understand that. So basically at this point, in a SASE cloud, you don't get security functions just living in the SASE cloud at the edge. So think about SASE is really enabling security, a cloud security at the edge environments of these service providers to then basically secure wherever they want to go in destinations, even to public clouds, private clouds, data center, other
Right.
sites. Even the internet is going through the SASE cloud, which
Hmm.
has a bunch of security functions. But in reality, if you think, oh, well, if I have SASE and a SASE cloud, that's all I need. The answer is no, you still need some security sprinkled along the path. You'll need some security at the
Hmm.
CPE where the SD-WAN, appliance or the virtual
Right.
function lives. Like, just even a generic or next-gen firewall.
Right.
You'll still
Right.
have endpoint detection response because you will just not get away from that. Like, it's like, oh, let me just take away any virus, from my laptop or my PC or whatever.
Hmm.
That's just not norm. You
Right.
still will need something in the laptop or endpoints, and until one day when they're just integrated with the operating system that we're trying to see now. And then
Hmm.
you'll also have, some security functions sitting at the hyperscaler clouds. For example, if I have a web server and a hyperscaler infrastructure as a service, then you want to put an application, web firewall, uh, you know,
Hmm.
so you want a WAF, a web application firewall, put
Right.
it right in front of that web server. So don't think that because we have SASE that we do just remove security everywhere. There will
Right.
still be security, but more thinner layers of security in other areas. But the most of the bulk of the security will have to be at the SASE cloud, and that SASE cloud will dictate who enters the cloud and how they'll enter the cloud will be based on zero trust. Your identity, with the application, device, or user, and where do you go is all based on policy. So now
Hmm.
the enterprise decides through their policy what user, device, and application goes where just like we see in Active Directory, that was very common in Active Directory in the enterprise for accessing, various services. Um, we see
Hmm.
now, that same idea will be used of accessing the network, and that's very
Right.
critical. And so zero trust, and they call it ZTNA or software-defined
Right.
perimeters and all that kind of stuff. Zero trust and SASE all go together, and you can't really split them up, and they're kind of
Right.
go hand in hand. And SD-WAN, in our
Absolutely.
spec, we're saying in SASE, you must have SD-WAN in order to make this a SASE compliant spec. And we were originally going to say, whatever VPN technology you want to use, you can. But
Mm-hmm.
we realized
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's the transformation of SD-WAN cloud security at the edge, with zero trust identity and access control that becomes the transformational journey that everybody wants to be on for the digital economy.
Right. At that point, you really need some intelligence at the customer edge there in order to implement those. So you
Yeah,
need
exactly.
SD-WAN anyway, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So
and
long-winded,
so
but
yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So, I remember, thinking back to again that conversation in 2017. You were kind of looking for enterprise input in terms of what they needed from the MSPs for SD-WAN. I assume you're looking for that now on the security side as well.
oh, absolutely. I mean, look, enterprises they're the top of the food chain, right? They
Hmm.
are the one buying the services, and then everybody falls in line from there. And they're buying it not because they just need it. They're buying it because they're going through their digital transformational journey, because they're digitizing all their workflows, and those workflows need network, and they
Right.
need an agile network, which is, as I talked about, it's experience, frictionless, great application performance where needed for their mission critical workflows, line of business workflows, and very secure. And
Hmm.
all of that is extremely needed. And so these enterprises, are driving the requirements of what these SASE, zero trust, SD-WAN, and all these network transformational services that service providers are offering.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So that was, I think, really really helpful review of everything that MEF is doing there. Are there particular standards that we should look out for if people wanted to sort of Google this and see what was going on in the security space? That might be Googling MEF 70 right now, but do we have names for the security stuff yet?
Oh yeah, yeah. We have it's there's so many numbers for me. But
I
look,
know.
the bottom
Yeah,
line is
not to
you
put
can
you
go
on the
to our
spot there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no,
So,
no. I mean, literally, there's hundreds of numbers of MEF standards. But
mm,
bottom line is, if you go to our website,
hmm.
MEF.net, you can
Right.
get everything you want to know about SASE, Zero Trust, SD-WAN, and also we're doing end-to-end slicing, which we can cover another time, or I can cover
Hmm.
briefly.
Hmm.
But and we're doing things at the edge because edge computing is huge. So the
Right.
four themes we're doing is, this highly automated underlay, which people don't realize, but the carrier Ethernet we've connected over the 15 years now has to be automated, so you can turn up
Right.
from one point of the world to another point of the world within seconds, like a cloud-like
Hmm.
experience that
Right.
between all the providers. The second, so we call that automated underlays. The second thing is the SD-WAN we talked about extensively. The third one is cybersecurity, and then
Hmm.
basically the fourth area we're doing is edge. Edge is becoming huge, and so edge. I
Yep.
talked about some of the scenarios, but end-to-end slicing is very critical, and
Hmm.
SD-WAN plays a very critical role with end-to-end slicing. We can cover that. I don't know where we are in time, but maybe another
Yeah,
podcast.
that's a great excuse to have you back on in a few months and sort of we've talked about Edge a bit on the show, but I think it would be good to get a much deeper dive. So let's plan on that. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, so takeaway, go to MEF.net. You can learn all about it. All our specs are on there. It's the new
Hmm.
version 2 of specs coming out. There's the bottom line is that MEF has turned an organization about network transformation. It's
Right.
really helping and filling in the gaps where no other SDO has taken on network transformation. And those are the areas I talked about: automated underlays,
Hmm.
east west between all the providers, SD-WAN overlays, SASE or cybersecurity, SASE, zero trust, and edge. Now we're talking about end-to-end slicing and other parts we'll do. So if you just go to MEF.net, you'll see that that's kind of what our strategy is. How do we
Right.
enable network transformation of the digital economy? Because that's kind of where the market's moving to. That's where the puck's going
Hmm.
to. That's where we're
Hmm.
going to. We're going up the stack, yet utilizing all our assets at the underlying transports to still become relevant. Because at the end of the day, and in my last kind of pitch, is basically if you're going to go to the edge and your edge is going to have all the AI, ML, and all the IoT analytics and blah blah blah, whether it be the building edge or the network edge. The bottom line is those edges have to be interconnected to all the other edges around the planet across,
And there's so
and
many of them.
that you have to be back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not using the internet to connect all those edges together. You're going to use the
Right.
internet to access the edge,
Right.
or SD-WAN on top of the internet to access. But the edge to edge will not be on the internet. It's going to be on a very high speed fabric, which is what we're doing for the underlays. So.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, well, that was one of the last things I was going to say here was that thinking forward like that of where the sort of WAN is going is that it seemed to me that MPLS had a pretty long time as the dominant corporate technology, right? 10 plus years, whatever. But that with SD-WAN, it's not going to be like that where, once they had, I forget what it is now, but whatever it was, 4632 bis or whatever the MPLS did, that was in place for a long time. Once you had that understood, you understood class of service, that was all there was for a long time. Doesn't seem like it's going to be that way with these new technologies. It's going to be a constant kind of rethink of where things sit, how to interact with them, how to implement them, right? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, Greg. I think the bottom line is that the digital workflows that are very new that we never really had before. I always say digital transformation is not just moving IT to the cloud. It's new workflows that are happening at the
Right.
edge.
Right.
It's like where have we ever seen, AI, ML, working robots or, having neural networks that, manage robots or look at, analytics and looks at what's coming across and, high speed photography or video feeds there's so many things going on with, AI, ML, IoT, AR, VR is about to come in, or smart glasses. That's never been done before.
Right.
So that's driving the network to be very different in programmable, virtualized, and also cloud-like in agility.
Right.
I cannot wait months to do things. I need to have things done immediately, like cloud-like
Right.
speeds. So this is the transformational journey that all our providers are on. They have to figure this out because the tidal wave of the money that's driving this is the digital economy.
Yeah.
Estimated to be very, very large. I can't remember, it was one of my slides, but it's massive in trillions and trillions of dollars. I find the slide if you want. But
Absolutely.
it is literally the key critical aspect of why basically networks are transforming. In fact, here's a slide: $6.8 trillion in investments from 2020 to 2023, and that was quoted by IDC, Futurescape.
Yeah.
So think about how much money we're talking about. That's massive, and networks are the underpinning for that, and therefore they're transforming because of this.
Yeah, and exactly that there's a change in that the relationship, if you will, right? So before the network had to be there and to facilitate now the sort of network is allowing for new applications to happen because of how the network is working. The DevOps is totally changed because of networking. It always just used to be something that sat there that other things happened over, but there's an aspect to which now the network is taking part more, if you will, in the development of more digital services.
Absolutely. It's not just a dumb pipe, it's a smart pipe, right?
Yep.
So very smart and very, very agile and adapts. And the network, think of it as your big computer bus, where all your processes now can run on. And it has to be in real time and be very articulate about security and performance and so on. So, it's distributed computing, in essence, using the network.
Right.
And you're seeing that from Kubernetes, and clusters and so on.
Right.
And apps with microservices. So when you say cloud native, it means microservice in nature. And microservice means it's spread across the whole network, and that is the essence of why networks are transforming at rapid speeds.
Right.
So.
Absolutely. Well, Pascal, this was really great and illuminating. I much appreciate it. Before I let you go, I always like to ask people while we're doing this podcast, since we kind of started it in light of COVID, what they were most excited to get back to. Now we're recording this at kind of a bummer of a time, perhaps, because Delta variant is rearing its head and maybe stopping that. But what are you most missing, or what are you most excited to get back to, if that's still a possibility?
I miss integrating with all great people like yourself. Going to your great events that you put on, and bottom line is I miss all the great events. Because at the end of the day, I think people need to talk to people in real life and be with people, because you learn so much in that human interaction
Yeah.
that we're kind of missing through this virtualized world. So I really miss that human interaction. And I'm really looking forward to going to all the events and talking to all our members worldwide, as I think there's nothing like a human being interacting with a human being in person. As you know, communication is not just about words.
Yep.
There's a lot to communication besides words that
Absolutely.
I think we lose.
Yeah, that Zoom fatigue thing is real. I find myself much more
Oh,
wiped out by one of these than I would a conversation with you in person. That's no doubt about it. And now we were talking before. You're a musician. I take it you're probably missing being able to play and hear live music as well, right? So
absolutely. In fact, we just started playing out. I play here locally in the city in Seattle a lot on the weekends, and it's just starting to open up now. So we're finally
yeah,
out playing a lot now, which is
that's
really,
great.
really great. And I really miss that a lot, because being a musician since I was almost 14 has been a huge part of my life. And I really think they all integrate together. I don't think I'd be the person I am to get today where I am without my music. It really is
Yeah.
part of who I am. So.
Yeah, likewise for me, absolutely, no doubt. Well, Pascal, this was good fun, and since we brought it up anyway, we'll make a note to get together again and talk about Edge. In the meantime, is there any place where if somebody wants to sort of catch up with you, they can find you, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, anything you want to share?
Absolutely. On LinkedIn, you can just find me on LinkedIn, definitely Pascal Menezes. And then obviously, you can go to the MEF.net website. You can also contact me, Pascal at MEF.net. Sorry.
Yeah,
And,
no worries.
at the end of the day, Greg, I really want to thank you so much for having myself and MEF on this great podcast. And you guys have been outstanding. I got to say, you guys have always been ahead of the game when SD-WAN first came out. At the WAN Summit, you guys put that WAN Summit on. You were talking in 2017, and I know you continue to be on the forefront. So I really appreciate all the great forward-looking views and the great content you bring to the industry.
Excellent. Oh, thanks so much for the kind words, and I can't wait till we can get together in person here. So yeah, all right, cheers. Thanks very much for listening. The WAN Manager podcast is brought to you by TeleGeography, a division of Primetrica Incorporated, and is edited and produced by Jane Miller. I wrote the theme song you're listening to right now, and we get administrative canine support from my dog Honeybun, who you might hear chiming in from time to time when the mood strikes her. If you want to learn more about our data, head over to telegeography.com, where you can find our blog that covers many of the topics we hit here, and you can sign up for our WAN Manager newsletter. Until next time, have a great day. So guess what, folks? We got some big news at TeleGeography, and that is that we just launched our WAN Forum. What is a WAN Forum? Well, this is a content hub and community for anyone involved in the management of a WAN or in IT infrastructure for mid to large enterprises. And it's got all the analysis and content that you enjoy from TeleGeography related to the WAN, plus some extra videos, some interviews, and some special tools that we've designed just for inclusion here, like our SD-WAN vendor selector, a high-level WAN cost calculator to give you some ideas of what market prices are. Basically, if you like the kind of stuff that we talk about on this podcast, and you're an end user, we think that you'll enjoy the WAN Forum. And of course, this is a space meant to be shared, which is why a WAN Forum subscription includes access for up to 20 members of your team. So check it out by heading to wanforum.com. We'll be adding some new tools, constantly adding new analysis, and announcing some upcoming WAN Forum events very soon. So you want to make sure you bookmark that. That's wanforum.com. We can't wait to see you there and for you to dive in.